Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 3-game college basketball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel. I do appreciate it a lot. With that said, let's get into the slate itself. So we have a 3-game slate that starts at 2 p.m. We have a couple games that are later in the day. That's Eastern time for that. But we have Georgia Tech versus Florida State, which is a 145-point spread. We have Louisville versus Boston College, which is a 135-point total, and Notre Dame versus Virginia Tech, which is a 144-point total. The Georgia Tech game is Georgia Tech is favored by 2 points. Boston College is favored to beat Louisville by 6 points, and Virginia Tech is favored to beat Notre Dame by 7 points. So the Boston College game is the lowest-scoring game on the slate, the odd game out rather. But all 6 teams have some viability today. I'm going to give you my top plays, and then I'll get into a breakdown of individual teams. So we're going to start with Jalen Worley for Florida State. Now, he has some decent upside today at his price. He's a little bit cheaper than I expected him to be. His floor is pretty low, but he's a pretty good play on the slate at this price, and he has some nice upside as well. So he definitely has big-time upside here. His price has come up from where it was, but he's playing well, and he should be able to continue that, especially on a higher scoring team on the slate. Then we're looking at Caleb Mills for Florida State, also a pretty interesting option for them. He's probably going to score in the mid 20s today. That's where he's relatively safe. He's a bit overpriced, but that's okay for the slate. He's the type of guy that he really doesn't have giant games, but he also doesn't have terrible games much. He's been in the mid 20s most of the season, and occasionally he has some bigger games. He definitely has some upside here. He did pretty good against Georgia Tech the last time out, having 27 fantasy points, and I can see a similar return here. Obviously, that will be good enough for this particular slate, likely. And then we're going to look at Zachary for Boston College at $6,500. He has some decent upside today as well. He's been playing pretty well. His upside is good, especially against Louisville, who he dominated last time. He does rebound decently for a guard as well. He had almost 40 points last time against Louisville, 40 fantasy points, that is, against Louisville, so he's definitely a top-tier play on the slate. As for the forwards, we're going to talk about Justin Mutz and also Grant Bassel. Sorry if I'm butchering your names at all, for Virginia Tech. Both these guys have some big-time upside here. They have dominated Notre Dame throughout their careers. Obviously, Mutz has played quite a few games against them. I think he's played 5 games against them, and in the last 4, he's been over 39 fantasy points in each one. I look for him to continue to do that. Obviously, both their prices are pretty high. As for Bassel, he has also been really good this season against Notre Dame. In the one game he's played against them, he had 42 fantasy points. Notre Dame really just doesn't have a inside presence worth worrying about. They are the worst inside team on the slate when it comes to defense. And so I can see a situation where you might even use both these guys in your lineup. Obviously, that could be a little bit risky, but I do think both of them have high-end value. But if you want an alternative to those guys, you could go to Franklin from Georgia Tech against Florida State here. Since becoming a starter, he's been ripping off double-doubles and even got a triple-double versus Syracuse. Now, he didn't have a good game against Florida State the last time he played them, but he didn't start then early in the season. But since he's been starting, he's been playing really well. So he has high-end upside here, just as much upside as anybody on the slate. Obviously, he's a little bit... he does seem a little bit safer than Bassel, but him and Mutz both have good potential here in this matchup. So I think all 3 of those forwards have viability today. In fact, you could try to find a way to play all of them if you wanted. As for some value plays here, I've got 5 I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to put them here on this first real quick, and then we'll get into those guys. So we have several good options from the sub $5,000 plays. These are my favorite ones, just based on their potentials and stuff like that. So we have a couple, sorry about that. We have a few guys here that can play guard and forward, and then we have a couple guards and 1 forward. So Overall, let's go ahead and get into these players specifically. We're going to start with Mason Madsen. He's probably my least favorite of these five, but he does play 15 to 20 minutes most games and does get some rebounds and points. His floor is low, but he's been playing well off the bench lately, and I think he has some viability here. Then we're going to look at Prince Aligby. Alibi. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. I really do like him quite a bit today. He is a starter. He's been playing decently as well. And despite a low floor, he can get over 20 fantasy points. He's also probably going to get somewhere between 10 to 17 fantasy points, which is where he normally gets, but he's relatively safe. He doesn't have too many floor games, so he's had a couple, but he's pretty much in that range most of the time, and he's relatively safe on this slate, especially against a plus matchup against Louisville. Then we're going to look at MJ Collins. He has been starting, and since starting, his averages have risen. He's not a must-play, but he does have some viability today. His floor is very low, though, and that's why his price stays low. But he's had some good games lately, and he had a good game against Notre Dame last time out. Obviously, depending on how many minutes he plays is pretty much what we're going to look at. As for Rodney Rice here for Virginia Tech, I feel like he's a little bit safer than Collins is, simply because he's been hurt all year and he's finally starting to play last few games off the bench. He's been playing a 15 to 20 minutes last 3 games, and he has some decent upside here. Obviously, coming off the bench on the high-scoring team on the slate, both these two have some mid-road upside here, and I expect Rice to be pretty heavily used due to his price as well. Then we're going to look at Bickerstaff here for Boston College, who also has some nice upside. This is really dependent on if Quentin Post plays, though. If Quentin Post plays, then Bickerstaff would not be a viable player at all. And if Post is out, then he would be a must start on the slate. So do keep that in mind. Bickerstaff for Boston College is a must play if Post is out. So then we're going to get into our team breakdown here. We're going to start with Georgia Tech for this here. They have a 7-deep roster. They do have one guy that is potentially out today, which is Devion Smith. And if we could figure out whether he's going to play or not, that would definitely change Kyle Sturdivant's potential here. Lance Terry also has some upside, especially if Smith is out. And Franklin and Kelly also look interesting today. I expect this team to be one of the higher scoring teams on the slate, and so they do have some viability there. As for Florida State, they have a 7 to 8 deep roster. They have 3 guys that play 30-plus minutes a game. They aren't projected to win, but it is the tightest game of the slate, and Worley and Mills both hold some value here. The rest of them are a little bit overpriced, though Corhin has some low-end value, but he's very risky. As for Louisville and Boston College, we'll start with Boston College, who's favored to win this game by 6. They do go pretty deep in the roster aspect, but they do have 2 guys that are potentially out. And if Post plays or not, that will definitely change how fantasy looks today. If he doesn't play, Bickerstaff would become a great play. Other than them, Zachary looks like a decent play today, and so do some of the value plays in Madsen and Algaby. If Langford returns, he could also be interesting. Which it does look like Langford is going to return today, so just keep that in mind. As for Louisville, the only guy on this team that really has decent upside is Mike James. JJ Traynor has some low-end upside if he starts, but it isn't ideal for this team. Projected to score the lowest points on the slate. I really don't like Louisville very much. You could make a good argument for Mike James, but other than him, it's probably not worth wasting too much time even paying attention to this team. As for Virginia Tech, against Notre Dame, Virginia Tech is favored to win by 7 points, which is the highest on the slate. Excuse me. They're also the highest scoring team on the slate, and they have 2 value plays in Collins and Rice that look pretty good. On top of, they have a couple other top tier plays. Mutz, Bassel, and Padula also have interesting upside on the slate. So I think there's some really good opportunity here for Virginia Tech to have viability here. But overall, they have the highest scoring team. They also have 4 guys that play 30-plus minutes, and they're probably the least, the team that uses their depth the least on the entire slate. So then we're going to look at Notre Dame here. this might be the team that's more annoying than any other for today's slate. They are one of the lowest scoring teams on the slate, and but Ryan, Wirtz, Lazarski, and Hammond all have some upside, but they all seem fairly risky for this team. They also tend to go pretty deep in the lineup, which doesn't help either. And they do have one guy that's potentially out, so we'll have to wait and see on Starling. But it looks like he may not play today, which could help Wirtz a little bit. So overall, though, this slate is pretty interesting. I think it's a really good slate. If you do play, feel free to comment below and let me know what you think about the plays, and have a nice day, guys.